Okay, welcome back to episode 3. This is getting more formal of Aginspire conversations, and this morning I'm delighted to be joined by somebody who's been very much an inspiration for me, a good friend, and I even unknowingly being possibly a bit of a mentor for me over the years, and that's Geoff Dooley. Welcome, Geoff. How are you?
Thank you very much, Tommy. Delighted to be here on the 3rd episode. Well done. Fair dues to you on starting this initiative, by the way. Yeah.
Thanks, Geoff. Always the positive words for me. No, it's been good. It's been great. I suppose the idea of it, Geoff, is to have just conversations with people. I find myself, and you know this, having so many interesting conversations with people in all aspects, not just animal health, of agriculture. I think, look, I just want to have more of those conversations and bring them to a bit of a wider audience, anyone who's willing to listen. Geoff, you've had an interesting path and career. I suppose before we go to the future, let's look into the past and tell people who Geoff Dooley is. And there's no better person than yourself, maybe, to tell people who you are and where you came from. Where did Geoff Dooley start out in agriculture, I suppose, for a start? You're farming in Limerick to begin with.
It's amazing how challenging a question like "Who are you?" can be, Tommy. So you've asked me to look back and where did my career in agriculture began. So grew up in a small dairy farm in County Limerick, Tommy. My parents would have had a very traditional enterprise. I'd have grown up, when I was a teenager, we might have been milking, I'm going to guess maybe 25, 28 cows, that kind of thing. Very traditional. So in terms of my career and how it all started, I started studying chemistry in what is now the University of Limerick. I suppose I was an unsettled teenager. I dropped out. I started working in sales. I started a book distribution business, then got involved in the family farm. Along the way, I had a contract cleaning business. All the time, I bought land, bought milk quota. This would be in the 1990s, got married, had 3 sons, married Geraldine. And so I had a very, how would I put it, broad range of experience. And I was one of those explorer type personalities, Tommy, always curious about, what else I could be doing, and maybe slightly impatient as well, I would say. I came back to studying, did a degree in environmental science at the Open University, and I had that drive in me, having had dropped out of university when I was studying chemistry. So did environmental science at the Open University. I think that really served to push me further, open up new ways of thinking, led me to applying for a Nuffield Farming Scholarship in 2002, 2003, which I was lucky enough to receive. That led me then to, I suppose, with that environmental background, the Nuffield experience behind me, I suppose, I wouldn't say I left farming, but I changed my system of farming, to use a phrase that's sometimes used, and much less intensive, had a beef enterprise, and I worked with an investment company that was looking to build a large-scale biodiesel facility here in Ireland, actually. That was Ryan Group Holdings in Limerick. A hugely entrepreneurial, ambitious enterprise, and a massive learning opportunity for me. At that stage then, I was looking for new skills, did an MBA, I did a degree in finance, started working in another Ryan Group organization after the biodiesel enterprise had failed. That was in the area of clinical trial technology, took me into a different world. After that, switched into waste recycling, waste plastic recycling. That was another enterprise that didn't end well, if you like. I had a history of ups and downs, doing things. It was at that stage, 2009, financial crash. I met a number of veterinarians who were looking to build a more collaborative presence in the Irish market, and out of that, XL Vets was founded. That's how I met you, Tommy, through that network. And along the way, I remained involved with the Nuffield organisation as well. I was chair of Nuffield from 2016 to 2019, I think, part of Nuffield International as well. And today, I am working as a leadership consultant, board facilitator, board chair. I find an awful lot of what I'm doing, Tommy, and maybe it reflects my own history, my own track record. It's in the area of harnessing uncertainty. Harnessing uncertainty to create new ways of being, new ways of understanding, new ways of doing. And in terms of what I do, I really see, and I've been thinking about this recently because I can see a pattern emerging in terms of what I do. And there's three aspects to it. The first aspect is making sense of the current reality. What's going on right now and connecting with that. I think sometimes that's something that's not done very well. The next phase is challenging the status quo and challenging the assumptions that underpin what's happening right now and that reality, and then finding a better way. So making sense, challenging, finding a better way, and that happens in an iterative way, I would suggest, with the people that I work with, and the people I work with are typically leaders or leadership teams in organizations, both in ag and outside of ag as well. And it's interesting how opportunities come, particularly in an environment that's changing quite rapidly.
If I go back, and you said you're a father to 3 young sons, and you had left school and you were uncertain of what you're doing. I think that's a lot of people face that challenge of maybe at a younger age not being sure of what they do. But and I think your story is interesting that it took you a bit of time. Maybe you're still looking, Geoff. I don't know, but it did take you a little bit of time earlier on to discover what you want to do, and that was environmental science. That started that learning bug. And I suppose, is that something we challenge young people with very early in their lives, that they have to they know what they have to do? This is your path, don't deviate off it. And if you don't know what you want now, you're in big trouble later on. Do we put too much pressure on young people to sort of have a path laid out in front of them? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Is that something you're mindful of?
I do, Tommy. Yeah. And it's very interesting, isn't it? And I think, it's very, so the first thing is, I think there is a pressure there to be able to say what you're doing and to be able, to put a label on yourself, or to be able to put a label on ourselves. And I'm still the same, Tommy. When people ask me, Geoff, what do you do? I can actually feel a rush of pressure, because I can't define what I do. I'm not a vet, for example, or I'm not a postman, or I'm not, I'm not any of those things. So when people ask me what I do, I always feel, here we go again. I have to try and explain this. So, but coming back to the question that you asked, I think the answer is yes, there can be that pressure there. It comes from the outside, I would suggest, which I think is what you're saying, to be able to define what you're doing. And I think it's a myth, Tommy. I don't think we can start out knowing what our purpose is. I think finding our purpose, in truth, is a process of elimination. It's a process of trial and error. We discover our purpose over time by doing things, testing. I think a very important part of discovering our purpose is the ability to reflect. Without a reflective part of our practice, very, very difficult to discover really what our purpose is. And I might come back to that idea that I discover, and I'm finding that a huge part of the work that I'm doing now is actually making sense of what's there right now, what's happened in the past, connecting with that reality and moving forward from there. I'm reminded, I think it's a famous quote from Steve Jobs, isn't it? That you can only make sense of the present, joining the dots, looking backwards, because without that reflection and without that, joining the dots, looking backwards, it's very hard to make sense. And the expectation that, we can know in advance, I think in general, with some exceptions now, I think some people can find that clarity at a very young age about what they're meant to do and have that clear sense of destiny. But for the vast majority, I think it's entirely unrealistic. And I think in a world that's changing so rapidly, arguably entirely inappropriate.
Yeah, but it can be a difficult space when you're in that space of this idea of joining the dots, looking backwards or looking forwards. But for people who are in that space, and it feels messy and it feels uncontrolled, that can be a difficult space to say that, I'm going somewhere and I have a destination, or I'm finding purpose. It can be very convoluted when you're in that position. I've been in that space myself. Just sit back and allow things happen around you. You have to have some sort of a plan and some idea of momentum as well, or have some momentum. But it can be a very messy place to be in. And you described, and you shortened maybe, I suppose, 14, 15 years there into a couple of sentences. So, but it can be a messy place just to sit back and let things happen. And I know a lot of people are in the space now at the moment where there's stuff happening around them, and they're kind of panicking a little bit. I get that sense of, where's my business going to be? Where am I going to be in 2 or 3 years' time with all this change happening? So it is an uncomfortable place to be in that people don't like to. They don't naturally. It's not something that we like to have a destination. We like to see where we're going to. So do you agree with me in that it can be an uncomfortable space to be in, to allow things to evolve around you?
Totally agree, Tommy. It's probably a learned skill, I think. I think it's yeah, I think it's it's an element of the hero's journey, isn't it? For anybody who's familiar with that myth, there's you're starting out in a quest and different things happen, and it follows a trajectory where there are some clear dips along the way, and then you get to the other side. Totally agree. That uncertainty, that sense of not knowing, is very uncomfortable. And to address that, what can happen is that we tend to stay where we are. We tend to have the view, let's batten down the hatches here. And sometimes that can be a very good idea, and sometimes it's the right thing to do. If you like, mindless action can sometimes not serve. So it's unquestionably messy, Tommy. It unquestionably requires us to be able to let go of some stuff so that we can let some new stuff come. And that letting go can be quite difficult. It's unquestionably part of it. But I would suggest to you that this is all part of, it's part of the developmental process. It's part of life. And it's through letting these processes happen and understanding that failure is part of it, understanding that we have to fail to learn, understanding that, that discovery of the new, which will often highlight, if you like, the deficiencies and the mistakes that we made in the past, if you like. Because when we discover something new and a new way of being, we tend to reflect on the past in a different way. And even that can be uncomfortable. But I think it's what the world is calling us to do. For me, I'd have to say, I actually think it's what life is about fundamentally. It's fundamentally about taking that journey.
Am I oversimplifying saying it so that we are defined by our experiences ultimately? So, we'll have lots of different experiences throughout our lives and careers. But if you look at experiences, some of them can be difficult. And you mentioned the word failure. And I think a lot of people's can be defined by failure and let it linger and let it really consume them. So what's your advice on failure and the doing and the process of that discovery? Because it can be an overwhelming thing when we view things as failure. It's interesting, with myself and yourself, we had what maybe could have been defined as a failure. We set up a project called Co-Farm 7 years ago. It started out, which I think was still a very good idea, by the way, as a platform to connect farmers directly with consumers, and this idea of these Ubers for taxis, and we had but ultimately as we progressed through it, it changed and it ended. And to be, I suppose, in the cold light of day, it would look like a failure. Now, looking back 5 years ago, I learned so much from that process. I mean, personally, from the experience of just doing all those things, I mean, I could go to no college to learn what I learned. But at the time, it was that sense, maybe when it came to an end for me, that it was failure. So how do we deal with failure over experience? And for young people, that could be more difficult.
I think you've answered the question, Tommy, and the fundamental ability is to be able to reflect, I think, on those experiences. And if you like to, will I use the phrase salvage? There is a price to be paid for failure. So you want to salvage the tuition fee, if you like, salvage that value and take it forward. And that does require an ability to be honest. I think sometimes with failure, and I mean, I speak from experience here, sometimes with failure, we can tend to blame external circumstances, or, there's a whole load of things we can blame before we start looking at ourselves and say, well, why did that fail? And it requires the ability to do that. And I think doing that, I think we can sometimes do that on our own, but having somebody to do that with you, be it by way of a trusted advisor, mentor, coach, whatever it is, can be very useful. I would reiterate, we need to be able to reflect on those things, take them forward, and with the learning, with the tuition, that you've paid for that tuition, make use of it. Failure is a great teacher. There's no doubt. All experiences are. Even the things that work well, they'll never be perfect anyway. I
came across a great quote over lockdown, and I think it's really applicable, certainly to farming, as farming systems can be difficult and always changing. And it's this idea of progress over perfection. And too many people probably chase perfection, and perfection is very unattainable, and it's very hard to define it, but progress is a great thing. Progress is ultimately growth. I suppose let's talk a little bit about agriculture. As a young green vet, back in the day when I worked in Avondale, we joined XL Vets, as you mentioned, and I joined the board, and I came across this interesting character, business development manager, and it was yourself for XL Vets. We sat on the board, and that's how we got to know each other. You've been involved, I suppose, in the veterinary business through your role with XL Vets for a number of years. You've also been involved with Nuffield Farming, as you said, including being a chairman of Nuffield Ireland and Nuffield International you've been involved with. Give me your take on, I suppose, the evolution of agriculture over that period. Maybe not just veterinary, but agriculture in general. What's your views been? It's rapidly evolving. What's your thought process on where agriculture was? I mean, we produce a lot of food. Now we're moving to a huge conversation around sustainability. What's your thoughts on agriculture? I know it's a very difficult and broad question, but what's your thoughts around how agriculture has evolved since your time, maybe since we first met, maybe 10 years ago?
So, cool. Wow. Look, I think the fundamental theme coming through, Tommy, on agriculture, it's something around efficiency. And there is, I would say, a relentless drive for greater technical efficiency. And that's coming across. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons for that. I think from the farmer's point of view, I think this is difficult. It's not like I have an answer to it, but I think the difficulty is that with this relentless drive for efficiency, which the farmer's part of that system. You know, to a certain extent, a farmer can have an agenda to be more efficient, but they're also driven by an efficiency agenda that's coming from outside of them, and it's driven, you know, by markets ultimately, and also, I suppose, by increasingly a sustainability agenda as well that's looking for that efficiency. From a farmer's point of view, it can feel pretty relentless. There's an element there of the treadmill. And there is an element of constant pressure on margins and price. And farmers are caught, I think, in a situation where, you know, if prices go up, the incentive is to produce more. But when prices go down, interestingly, the incentive is also to produce more. And I think that's maybe what makes farming unique to other sectors and other industries. Other sectors and industries will tend to respond to price differently, whereas I think farming is caught there. And yeah, it's a tricky one. And I think it's difficult for farmers to break out of that system. And I think sometimes they do, and they break out of that system, and we'll see this, I suppose, quite a bit. And we know some people who've done this, you know, farmers who've become, you know, develop their own brands and they go direct to consumers. Maybe going back to the co-farm idea, which you referenced a couple of minutes ago. And they tend to break out of that gridlock and I suppose be masters of their own destiny. And I can understand why they do that. For others that stay in the system, it really is, ultimately, to me, it feels like a race to be almost the last man standing as others around you fall. And we can see this, I think, across the globe. Massive increase in scale in agriculture, massive reduction in the numbers of people working in agriculture. I mean, this is, you know, this is happening all around us and probably at an accelerating rate than before. And it's driven by that relentless drive. So, yeah, so I think farmers might be faced with a choice as to whether, you know, they're going to play within the system or step outside of the system. And I think to make that choice, the first thing a farmer needs to do is be able to recognize the system and make a decision about it. Because sometimes I think, you know, we're not conscious of it. We're not conscious of, you know, the agenda and the forces that are going on around us. We just play the part and, you know, we react to the pressure. And for some, I think, you know, that's maybe not a pleasant place to be. For others that can play it and are doing it intentionally, sure, there are great opportunities. And we can see that. You can simply see that within the Nuffield network. You know, brilliant farmers doing different things, responding to the environment differently, making different decisions. I think that when we make those decisions from the position of awareness, you know, that's much more powerful. You know, when we're being driven by an agenda, clearly that's not powerful. And I think maybe that's where farming is for me. And farmers in particular.
It's a difficult system to begin, because if you look at, and some people will talk about, we have to produce the same amount of food in the next 50 years as we did in the last 10,000 years. Depending on who you talk to, we have to continue to increase food production. And as you said, the systems are getting bigger. And you know, if you look at global food production, that's probably, and if I'm in farming and I don't, you know, to go out and do my own thing, probably something I would do. But you know, it takes a certain mindset, it takes a certain determination. It's very difficult. So for a lot of people, they're going to stay within the system, whatever way that system is going to evolve. And I think, if you know, I think the system, I don't think the system's going to change. That's my view on it. I think the system will, there'll be people that will challenge it, but farms will get bigger. You know, it will be larger corporations that will run, I suppose, food production. It's how they evolve maybe will direct farming, as opposed to farmers taking control of it. I don't see that happening. Am I wrong or right in my views? I know there's no wrong or right in these things, but I think the big is just going to keep getting bigger. That's my own view at the moment, and I've thought a lot about this. So if I was thinking of, you know, in the past, I would have said yes. I would have been pushing people to maybe break out from the system. But I think now it is the objective to make the system the best it can be, and be mindful that it's putting people under pressure, and be mindful that we won't have a system if we don't look at farmer sustainability and that treadmill type approach to food production. That I'm coming to that process, that thought process, that actually the system is the way it's going to be. And you know, great discussions around regenerative agriculture, great discussions around you know, niche food business and all that, but I think I can't see it changing or evolving, and not even this current crisis will do that. I think actually maybe it'll accelerate some of the trends around getting bigger. I don't know, what are your thoughts on the system change? Because I know you look at systems as systems consultant almost. So what's your view of how this will evolve, how farming systems might evolve?
Certainly, the trajectory we're on, Tommy, is exactly of what you described. You know, it is that efficiency and scale story. I agree with you. I don't see it changing at the system level. I think individuals within the system, though, do have choice. And, you know, they can choose to remain part of it, or they can choose to step outside and do something different. And I made that decision in my farming career back in 2004, I think it was. So I think, look, maybe going back to what I was saying, I think, look, we're talking about a system. I think being aware of the system gives you choice. If you're not aware of the system you're in, you do not have choice. You're driven by the system. You know, it's a bit like, you know, being in a picture, let's say, and this is leadership development. And I think this is the essence of leadership development, is the ability to be able to step out of the picture that you're in and look at it, rather than just play your part within the picture. That ability. And I think at the individual farmer level, and this is why I really love Nuffield, by the way, because I think it creates, let's call them stretch environments, in which people and those involved in the Nuffield program are invited to consider their contribution to the world. You know, they can look at it from different perspectives. That for me, that's it, Tom. Has a life of organism. It's like a super organism, and it is being driven in a certain direction. And with the participants in it, the components in the system, they have agency as well, if they're aware of it and if they have the ability to exercise it. And I think for farmers, that's maybe the choice.
But is that not how we all affect change? It's just through self-awareness, whether it be farming systems or farms or ourselves. If you're on a treadmill of any sort in life, if you don't have the awareness to step aside and just view yourself and see what you're doing, and it's a great thing to do, is actually just step back and take a look at where you are, assess what you see, and be honest about what you see. And ultimately, is that now how we affect change? And you said at the very start that your work now is based on looking at where things are, where things could be, and how we change them. Am I taking you up wrong or right on that?
No, I agree completely, Tommy. I think it's very difficult to do, though. I think that's the thing. That ability to step back, as you say, and to really see if you like, the system and your part in it. That is difficult, to be able to separate, if you like, the agenda that you're driving versus the agenda that's driving you. That's very difficult to do. And I know I don't get this right. You know, I know, you know, because we all have, you know, and it's driven by fear and anxiety and, you know, how am I going to make money, and the sense of the unknown, and, you know, what will other people be thinking of me, whatever it is. All this stuff is going on. And the ability to be able to put that to one side, if you like, and look at it objectively, you know, and look at it as an object rather than you being the subject of it or me being the subject of it. That's not easy to do. But yes, I would agree with you. I think that is the essence of leadership development, as opposed to leadership skills or leadership training. You know, it's this idea, and you know, and I think a lot of leadership stuff at the moment, or not all of it now, but a lot of it is about, you know, new tricks, new tactics. You know, who do I copy? You know, who's a great leader? What traits can I mirror? And fundamentally, I think that can be useful. I think it can serve. But it really, it's a bit like maybe adding a new app to your phone, or it's a bit like, or putting a new file on my computer. But ultimately, it's the operating system that needs to change if we're to make a real difference. You know, and I think a lot of what we do on the leadership side, and you know, it's not really leadership development; it's more leadership skills training, and that's why I think Nuffield is different, because I think it's one of the few programs, even though it doesn't use this language. Now, Nuffield doesn't use this language, or at least I haven't heard, and, you know, I've been involved in quite a bit, but I could say Nuffield, more than most programs, is firmly in the area of leadership development, you know, because over a prolonged period of time, and this stuff takes time. You know, leadership development isn't about learning a new skill. As I say, it's about really going into the operating system. And, you know, rather than looking at the problem, it looks at the people who are working with the problem, and it's at a different level. And that's one of the things I love about Nuffield. And that, I think, is a fundamental difference between sort of conventional leadership and where leadership development, I think, needs to go. And I think Nuffield is in that space already.
Just before we go on to leadership, because you've kind of hit on a lot of very important leadership topics there, and it's an area I'm really interested in personally, and I suppose in organizations that I work with, and maybe in agriculture. Just get back to the system again, and the way the system's evolving, and we hear the word sustainability being used. We're looking at potentially a new government formation, which will maybe set us in a new direction, a new European Green Deal, EU Farm to Fork document, that's pushing us in a slightly different direction with farming. And I think if I look at farming again, it was about safe food production for the last number of decades, and now that's changing again, and rightly so, because I don't think there's any challenge as big as the environmental challenge we're facing, climate change. How do you see, if you were looking at 10 years into the future, what trends do you see occurring, or how do you think this sustainability piece will go? Because sometimes there's a lot of sustainability talk, and it's a nice buzzword, and you know, but I think we're really getting into the action phase now, where we're going to see changes to farming systems because of it. What's your opinion on the next? I know these are incredibly hard questions to answer, but you know, what's the next decade going to look like on the sustainability piece? What trends are you seeing or thinking about and find most interesting, maybe?
You know, the first thing I just observe is, with regard to the creation of the new government, you know, one of the things that I think it hurts me, Tommy, it is, and it comes across in the media a little bit, and it's this idea that rural Ireland is suspicious of the green agenda, and that idea, and might even be against the green agenda. And for me, I think rural Ireland has a massive opportunity in this space, and I'd like for the narrative to be much more positive. And I think there's something missing there in that story. I think there's a voice missing and a perspective missing that's not being articulated by whatever Irish farming is or farming in Ireland is. There's a sense that, you know, farming is the handbrake on the green agenda, and I think that to me does not make sense, given the role that farming has to play in this. That said, coming back to you know, the question that you're asking.
I think that's a very, very interesting point, though. I think like I look at the potential changes as huge opportunities for farming. And again, from my working in agriculture, I mean, farmers are working with the land or in the land. Custodians of land. I know we use those words a little bit too often, but they want to see change. It's not, farmers will follow again maybe the system of what they've been told to do. This is what we've been told to do for a number of years. Now give us a new task, but at least allow the people who are doing the task to have a say in what happens. And I wouldn't like to see complete bureaucracy to come into this role of people that aren't on the ground and know what's happening, not have a role and be guiding that future path as such. But anyway, sorry to interrupt you there. I agree with you on that. I think farming is the answer. If you look at environmental sustainability, for producing food, which is critical, water quality, environmental biodiversity, farming can actually just make changes to make it such a positive story. And I think also for me, agriculture is such an exciting industry from that perspective. The opportunities are there because it's one of the fundamentals. And we stood in the ploughing 4 or 5 years ago, and a very smart guy said to us, it's going to be about food, water, and environment for the next couple of years. They're going to be the drivers. And if you look at Irish agriculture, we're ticking all those boxes. So sorry, Geoff, to interrupt you there, but I think it's a really valid point. That rural Ireland isn't the enemy. We are, look, it's maybe over egging it a bit. We could be the saving grace in this environmental piece.
I think there's so much opportunity in this space, Tommy. I was reading something recently that that there is available in terms of capital in the world, $28 trillion floating around, looking for opportunities to address, if you like, wicked problems, which climate change, biodiversity is. This is going to be the future, Tommy, I believe, for a lot more than a couple of years. The science in this, we look at the science around the pandemic, but the science in climate change it's hardcore. There is, when you look at this, there's no escaping physics, chemistry, science. It's not opinion, and it's whatever way we look at it. Yeah, there is catastrophe on the horizon. We just haven't got to the point yet where we're seeing the bodies in trucks driving around to mass morgues. We haven't seen that, and therefore we don't have the visceral reaction to it. But the science is just as hard. It's just as solid, and it's a pandemic, if you like, beyond our wildest imagination. There is no vaccine for climate change. It's not something you can ride out for a couple of years and get to the other side of it. So I think it's real. I think the other interesting thing about it, unlike the pandemic, which has led to, I suppose, a drastic shutdown in the economy, and we see it all around us. Climate change, and there's a lot of work done on this. About 2 to 3% of GDP. Now, it does involve system change as well, but that's what it costs to address this problem and get ourselves into line with what the Paris Climate Accord is asking us to do, which is keeping warming below 1.5 degrees. That's what it's costing. So the solutions are there. Farming can be a key part of that. I agree with what you're saying. And this goes back actually to something that you said in the opening. You said, the purpose of Aginspire is to, create a space for conversation. And for a conversation to happen, it needs to be inclusive. And yes, farmers need to be conversing, and conversing meaningfully. There's a lot of talk in the world, Tommy, isn't there? An awful lot of it is on social media, where people are talking to other and mirroring back and forth to each other a series of opinions, all of them being caught in conformity traps, groupthink type discussions. We're not really engaged in meaningful conversation with people who hold alternative perspectives, learning from each other. And I think with Aginspire and what you're doing here, I'd like to think that that's a direction that it could go in, or maybe it's in it right now, where you do bring in alternative perspectives and where there is an openness to learning from people that have alternative points of view. That's what conversation is about, and that's what's needed. I suppose
that's exactly, Geoff, the idea. And is you can get very much caught in your own cognitive biases as you see the world the way you want to see it. And it suits you to continue to see it like that and ignore things like climate change. And I suppose I spent December reading about climate change because I really didn't understand it. I read a lot of Michael Leeman's stuff. And it is frightening when you get into it. It's absolutely frightening, not just as somebody involved in agriculture, but I have 5 young kids. This is going to be the world that they grow up in. And we really have to just get moving. And I think what I do see when it comes to climate change is it tends to be black or white. You know, you're either here with us in climate change or you're over here not doing anything. And there's a huge chunk in the middle of, and I'm probably part of that middle, who want to do things better, but are caught in ruts. We're busy, consumed by life. We know the right thing, the right and the wrong thing to do. But telling us we're just wrong all the time is not good. And it's probably the same with farmers. You know, farmers feel like that everyone's, you know, telling them that they're doing the wrong thing, but they want to change and want to evolve. So it is that idea of better conversations. I mean, anyone who's just knocking things, no, but anyone who's challenging me, absolutely. Challenge my thinking, challenge the way, you know, and give me science. It has to be based in science. But, and I hope that I will have that open view to learn and think, okay, the world has been this way for a while, my world's been this way, but maybe this could happen. And it's that was the idea of these conversations, is to push myself a little bit around that. So I absolutely, but I think we get entrenched in views, and when you've entrenched views, the gap grows wider. But there's a huge silent majority, and I often think, and I'm on social media, and I'll put these out through social media. Social media has done more harm than good, because we do tend to migrate towards people with our own views, and we have all these massive opinions, but we mustn't forget about the silent majority who do want to do the right thing, and that's in farming and beyond it, probably.
Yeah, I love that concept. I think you described yourself as being in the middle, Tommy. And I think it's in the middle, you know, that's where the real potential is. If you like, you know, on one side you have, if you like, those that are involved in the delivery of the current system, if you like, you know, they're operational and they're pragmatic. And then you have maybe on the other side, the dreamers and the mystics about the way the world can be. But it's in the middle, you know, those people, if you like to use a phrase, that are bilingual and can speak in the language of the mystics and the dreamers, but also, if you like, the puzzlers, those that are trying to figure out the here and now. They're the people that can bridge the gap. And that's where I think projects are. I think that's where investment is going to be. I think that's where opportunities are. I think that people who can tune into that space, you know, not be polarized on either side. And I agree with you. I think that's what social media does. That's where the opportunities are. And I think that's a very exciting space to be in, you know, in this, you know, where we are right now. And I think it's where if you like, to use a phrase, you know, movers and shakers, those guys that are looking to really affect change, they're going to be in that space. That's where you'll meet them. So yeah, delighted to hear that. But it's going to be messy, Tommy. Like whatever is you know, it's going to be. I think it's important that we be hopeful. Sometimes maybe it's difficult to be optimistic. I think there's a lot of challenge there. I don't think we have emotionally connected with the sustainability challenge. We can intellectualize it. You know, you've read some books in December, you know, and I think we do that, but we haven't emotionally connected with it. You know, it's not our problem. The problem is out there. You know, it's a technical problem, but in our heads, but in truth, it's an adaptive problem, because what really has to change is our mindset, you know, our beliefs around this problem. They need to change. I think we're fundamentally confused about how to make money out of it, and I think that holds us back. And I agree with you on that I think there's a lot of fear around that, and we don't understand our role in it then. And even if we felt we could make money out of it, because we can see that there's funds out there and there's, you know, lots of funding available, we don't understand our individual role in it either. You know, what can I do to make a difference? What can I do that will mean that I will be relevant in this Green New Deal world? So I think there's a lot of work to be done in creating positive examples, creating case studies that, if you like, show the way in this space as to what it can look like. It'll be messy work. It demands leadership. It demands commitment. It demands investment. It demands, yeah, real guts. It demands, I think, a style of leadership, Tommy, you know, where we really put the impact of our actions on others first, and before we consider how leadership serves me or serves you. That we look at and it's this idea maybe of moral leadership. And I think moral leadership is that, you know, it's leadership where we consider the impact of our actions on others first. That's I think, at the cultural level, a change in mindset?
That's a really difficult thing to do, and you shared a book with me, and I was pleasantly surprised. If you ever want to give anyone a gift, a well thought out book is a great gift. You gave me a gift, and it was Simon Sinek's new book on infinite thinking and infinite. This idea that it's not about the end game. That you mightn't even in your lifetime achieve what you're trying to achieve, but you know where you're going. That any organization or person should have that infinite mindset around. And I think with climate change, you said it's not about the next decade, it's about decades and decades to come. But affecting change in leadership is a really difficult, it's a space I'm interested in, and I read about, but it's a very difficult space to be in, because if you look at the current situation now and the like social media, and if you take a strong view, you put yourself up there, and you need to be prepared for it's easy to be popular, and populism, as we've seen the rise of populism, and you talk about morally doing the right thing. Again, that's very hard, because if it doesn't economically put money back in my pocket, that's a difficult thing to do. But to do the right thing and show true leadership, have to know what you're about and what cause maybe you're about, and be adaptable. But it's a difficult space to be in. And if I look in agriculture now, we need that leadership to come around, not to look back in the past of the way it always should have been, but where are the opportunities in the future? And that doesn't always involve telling people what they want to hear, Geoff. So, I mean, you talk about looking at the here and now and affecting change and taking action. So what have been your key lessons around leadership, personal leadership? You mentioned a lot of them throughout our conversation, and then maybe at an organizational level, effective leadership there. What are the key things you think now will bring us through this difficult period? And it's not even a decade, it'll be forever more maybe. But what are the key things as individuals and maybe as organizations we need to look at when we think and talk about leadership? Because it's not just reading a book or writing it down, it's actually affecting that change.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It reminds me, and there's so much of what you just said there, Tommy. So in a leadership role or a leadership capacity, I think we can only be effective to the extent to which we can tolerate criticism. Because that's part of it, and I think that's something I suppose we can see around us, and it's something I know I've had to learn to understand that. In terms of what we can do, and I know this is something that I haven't got right, and I have reflected on it. It is that ability to listen with empathy to those that have a different point of view to me. That's something that I've had to learn. So in the past, and I'd like to think I get this better in future. So in the past, if somebody had a different opinion to me, I would have probably pretty much dismissed them. I wouldn't have spent too much time talking to them. Or if I did talk to them, I'd be doing what I felt I had to do out of politeness, or because I was meeting some social expectation or professional expectation. But I really wasn't trying to get to grips with their point of view so that I could take on board their truth and absorb it and integrate it with mine. So I think when we talk about leadership, that's a lesson I personally had to learn. I think I've learned it the hard way. And I think the society we live in today doesn't create great opportunities for that, because, and I think you've mentioned, I think social media is part of it, where there's a lot of polarization there. There's populism is a real part. You tell people what they want to hear, keep telling them. I mean, there's no better way of, I suppose, sort of spreading stupidity, really, than you keep telling people what they want to hear, and then they echo it back to you. And that's the world that we live in. And the counter to that, or the action that we can take, is in part, Tommy, what you're doing: conversation where there's listening with empathy, listening to understand, not listening to judge, not listening to prove the other guy wrong, not listening to to point out the fault in the other person's thinking, but really to understand. And you can see that, I've involved in several, I suppose, meetings with farmers where there can be a lot of concern about what consumers are saying, and different campaigns about whatever it is that are perceived to be anti-farmer. And on both sides, the challenge is, for the consumer and the farmer to understand the other, because it's through understanding each other rather than just, forcing each other further apart that a better understanding comes. And it is those leaders that have the capacity to facilitate that, to build those bridges. I think they're the leaders that will make the biggest difference and do make the biggest difference. But it's not easy work. It's not easy work, no.
It's interesting you say that, and I know we've talked about agriculture, and I'm conscious of time here as well with you, but I think some of the challenges we face in agriculture, you can extrapolate them out to the wider society, and this is our biggest challenge, and it's this idea of empathy. And it's been a term, the pandemic created challenges. Now we have all these other challenges that are appearing, in social disorder and distrust and all those things. But it is that idea of empathy, and I think it's empathy all around. It's not just the one viewpoint on the left or you're in the middle. We need to listen to people. I had an interesting conversation with you about Donald Trump, who is, he's on every newspaper. He's on every time you open up social media, and for me it's mind blowing that he's still there. But you made a very interesting point. He's there for a reason. There's people who voted for him, and we've got to understand why he's there, because if we don't understand that, we can't understand, why he got there in the first place. Why are people feel that Trump is the answer? I mean, he preys on often the fears of people, and it's just mad to watch it, but he's there for a reason. So I think when we talk about empathy, it's not just listening to the nice stuff we want to hear, it's listening to the hard things we don't want to hear and understand why they're happening, and that's a real challenge.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's something there, Tommy, isn't there, that when we I mean, I agree with you on the Trump thing. I mean, I just, it's taken me a long time to try and understand it, and I'm still battling with it. But there's something there, when I always remember Hillary Clinton in the 2016 campaign, she described the Trump supporters as deplorables. And that demonstrated, I suppose, her maybe deafness, inability to understand something that did not align with her worldview. And Trump played on that mercilessly and got to where he is. And the real challenge, and I think what happens is that when we reject a worldview or a philosophy or a way of thinking, and this could be within a small organization, it could be within our family, it could be anywhere, but when we reject it, we're actually rejecting part of ourselves. And our challenge, from a leadership perspective, is to be able to integrate all of this stuff, understand it, own it, and find a better way. And that's not easy work. That is not easy. And it's messy. And there's trial and error involved in it. Patience is required. This goes back to that idea of leadership development as well. Sometimes we think we don't have the time for this stuff. I suppose leadership development, and as we develop as leaders, we find that we have more time. We have time for this stuff. That's part of leadership development. There's nothing easy here, Tommy. It's very messy work. I think it's the journey we're on, though.
It is messy. Look, but it's an exciting space to be in. I suppose, Geoff, taking from, maybe this is a very hard question. I don't think I've asked you an easy question so far, but taking from your experiences, be it from farming right through your career, working in the veterinary industry and all the strategic work you do and working with effective organizations now, what are the characteristics, particularly for young people, that we want to maybe hone in on and think about? What are your lessons that you've learned? What have been your inspirations that have, looking back, joining the dots backwards, as Steve Jobs said? What have been your key lessons that you would say to people, and maybe the lessons you might tell your young kids now, your three boys? What are your lessons from the experience that you've gained?
Wow. I suppose, speaking for myself, and I think it goes back to a question that you asked at the start, Tommy, it's that idea that we can't think our way into the future. We have to act and then learn. And it's about taking the next step, moving forward, learning, moving forward. I think, so I have three sons. Yeah, the eldest guy, he just finishing college and starting his first job in the middle of July. And I can hear from him and the other two lads as well, you know, this sense of, I suppose, particularly even now, you know, the sense, you know, that there's, if you like, a significant economic shock happening in front of us, you know, that sense of uncertainty. And I think but life can actually be more beautiful and more exciting when we just learn to take the next step. Just take the next step. You know, we don't have to see it all the way through, but just take the next step and see what emerges. And within that, being able to manage our own fears and anxieties. Now, to manage them, we need to know what they are. We need to be aware of them. And we all have these sort of anxiety management systems. And that's why we want certainty, you know, because it helps us to manage our anxiety. And then when certainty is not available, we get more anxious. So there's a skill there, Tommy, I believe. And maybe it's something around how we talk to young people, and, you know, maybe it's something around the expectations that we set. But there's something there about being able just to take the next step and learn from it, and then take the next step again, and repeat. And doing that with an open heart and an open mind. None of this is easy. You know, it's easy to say it, but to really do it, it's not easy. And we have to accept that. But, you know, these are kind of like ancient wisdoms, aren't they? I mean, there's nothing here I'm saying to you that's spang new, Tommy. It's this is stuff that's been around for millennia. It's just become more important maybe in today's world.
People will argue that it's common sense almost, but there's one thing about common sense, and it's not common.
No.
I'm very mindful of time with you, and you've given me a lot of your time this morning. Always an inspiration. You always think a little bit deeper, and that's what I've always enjoyed our conversations. You've challenged me certainly to think a lot deeper about what I do, and certainly jump away from my cognitive biases that are in front of me, and that's been an important thing. And I think the most important message was that idea of empathy. It's something, again, I learned. I mean, I was woeful at that, of not understanding people that I was working with, working for, and it's this idea of stepping into the other person's shoes, see the world as they see it. And it's a remarkable skill because, and I know you're a big fan of Seth Godin, who's a marketeer. His greatest lesson, and probably one of the greatest marketeers in the world, is just that idea of marketing is empathy. So empathy is a skill that I think if we could all deploy more of it, it'd be a better world. So I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to wish you luck in your career. Obviously, we'll be continuing to talk. I know that you're moving sort of out of agriculture a little bit with your new work, and that'll be an exciting space to see how that works for you. But ultimately, the skill sets that you've developed, I think they go across industries, and I think that's just continued success. And thanks for your time, Geoff.
Thanks very much, Tommy. And, you know, as you were speaking, I was just thinking, you know, a final thought, and it's this idea, you know, that the best thing that we can do to help ourselves is to help others succeed. And I think if that was, you know, that's something that you could say to anyone, and it's something, Tommy, I think that you do, and I think you've made your profession out of that, and continue to do it in so many different ways in terms of what you're doing online, what you're doing now through this Aginspire initiative, off your own bat, something that you've created and devised yourself and make happen, and helping others to succeed through these conversations, through sharing information, and in so doing, I wish you every success with it. And thanks very much for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thanks, Geoff. And again, I'm going to just bring people on that are just going to praise me, because that's great for my own confidence. Take care, Geoff. It's great to chat to you.
Yeah. Okay. Likewise. Okay. Goodbye.